Hey guys, it's Amy with Manor Farms Homestead. Today I'm going to be canning sweet potatoes. Now sweet potatoes are one of those foods that I grow to add to my stash that I don't really have to do any kind of preservation with. So I harvest them, I lay them out in my garage in a really warm environment for several weeks and let them cure. Thereafter, they go into a cool environment with a little bit of humidity, kind of like a root cellar environment. And they'll store for months like that without any added energy from me. So why would I want to can something that stores well without any type of preservation on my part? Well, the main reason is going to be convenience. Sweet potatoes do take about an hour to cook if you decide you're going to add them to your meal. They're not something that you can just throw on at the last minute. You got to decide ahead of time and add about an hour to your cook time to get those ready. Additionally, they do only keep so long. So if you grow, like me, a large amount of sweet potatoes, at some point you do have to preserve those or you're going to have some loss just due to spoilage. So my sweet potatoes I harvested in late August. Typically they're harvested in late October, early November, but we had a really good year for sweet potatoes. They took off and they were ready to harvest early on. So they've been in my garage for about 4 months now. Everything looks good. I don't really have any lossage or spoilage, but I've decided to take some of the huge potatoes that are really not good for eating, that typically you'll just use for baking pies or something. And I'm going to chop those up and get them canned today. All right, so let's take a look at my kitchen setup for pressure canning. Now, sweet potatoes, because they are a low acid food, do have to be pressure canned. You cannot water bath can sweet potatoes safely. So what I have set up here is my pressure canner. I have a 23 quart, I believe it's a Prestige pressure canner. It will hold 7 quarts or 18 pints. Now, one of the things I did figure out with this pressure canner, it'll actually hold 20 smallmouth lid pints. So that's what we're doing today. I've checked out my gasket, it looks good. Pressure gauge looks good. So this is all set up and ready to go. Now what I have here is my simple syrup. This is a light syrup. So I made this with 4.5 cups of sugar and 18 cups of water. So it's a double batch of simple syrup made in the light syrup category. And I'll link in this video on how to make simple syrups. You can find it on most canning websites. Now these are all new lids. The rims, some of these are used, but they're fine to reuse. Now when I'm pressure canning, I use fresh, out of the box, clean lids. That's because with pressure canning, it's a lot harder on this seal. Sometimes I do reuse my lids when I'm water bath canning, but I don't do that for pressure canning. We have some really nice, huge washed sweet potatoes here that I'm going to be getting peeled and diced. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these sweet potatoes washed. I've got a colander here in the sink. Mainly we just want to get any residual dirt or impurities left behind from the peelings when we peeled them and cut them up. Now, just for purpose of flavor, we're going to put a half a teaspoon of flaky sea salt in each of our pints. This is completely optional. It just adds extra flavor during the processing. So I have half of my jars here that I'm going to use for this whole canning batch. We're going to go ahead and get these packed so it gives us an idea of how many more we might need, or if we're already pretty much where we need to be. I'm going to fill each of the jars a little above really the 1 inch mark, because this is going to settle a lot as it cans. When we fill our simple syrup up in here, we'll leave an inch of head space. Be careful with some of the big chunks of sweet potato. You may want to size these down just a little bit, just because we're using pint jars. That's probably a little bit more ideal. If you were using quarts, you can use some bigger chunks, but otherwise it'll take up a lot of space in your jars and you won't be able to pack as much into your jars. Now we're using raw potatoes here, and a lot of the recipes you'll see, including what comes with your canner or on the canning websites, is going to call for pre-cooked potatoes. So typically you'll steam them, bake them, something for about 15 or 20 minutes, just so that you get them soft enough where you can take the peels off of them. As far as safety in canning, there's really no difference in raw packing your sweet potatoes versus hot packing them. They're still going to be safely pressure canned, this method. The main difference is, how much time you spend either peeling them and prepping them versus steaming them, letting them cool, and then hand peeling them where you can take the peelings off that way, as opposed to using a potato peeler like what I used here. So we've got all of these 10 jars packed as tight as I can get them. There's still a lot of room in there, as you can see, for the syrup. There's just no way to pack these super tight with doing this raw pack method. It looks like we have probably about half of the potatoes left, so we may need just a tiny bit more from these, but for the most part this should get us our 20 pints of sweet potatoes for the canner. We've got all 20 of our smallmouth pint jars packed with sweet potatoes. These have a half a teaspoon of non-iodized salt in each pint, and we're going to top it off to 1 inch below the top with a simple syrup. Now the simple syrup that I have that's just come to a boil here is a light syrup, and I'm going to link in the video to how to make simple syrups, but you can go extra light, light, medium, heavy. This is just a light syrup. With each jar, you'll want to wipe the rim to make sure there's no syrup on that lid before you apply your metal lid. Just hand tighten it, and then this goes into your canner. The water in our canner is already warming up. It's not boiling, but we've got it heating to the point that we saw a few little bubbles in it. So for our canner, we had to put the second rack in here so we can do a double layer of pint jars. The canner's loaded up and we're ready to get the lid on it and start getting it up to temperature and get ready for processing. Now right here's our pressure gauge. This is what you're going to have to be watching if you actually have a gauge pressure canner versus one that just has a lid that rocks on it. So we're going to start heating this pressure canner up until we have a steady stream of steam coming out of our little vent. We'll let that go for 10 minutes venting, and then at that point we'll put our little stopper. It's a little weight stopper that will go on this, and the pressure will begin to build. Okay, we have just reached the point where we have a steady stream of steam venting out of our canner. We're going to time this for 10 minutes now. It's been 10 minutes and we're going to go ahead and put the weight on our pressure canner. And then the steam, after a few minutes, will slowly start coming up. Based on our altitude here, we are going to pressure can our sweet potatoes at 11 pounds of pressure. That's this little dot here. And they'll pressure can for an hour and 5 minutes. For pints, if we had been doing quarts, it would have been 90 minutes. Now it does take probably 10-15 minutes to get your pressure canner up to pressure. Sometimes it takes a little longer. It really just depends on how high your heat is. I try not to heat at too high a temperature just because it can cause some siphoning in your jars. So I try to kind of keep it at just above a medium heat to bring it up to pressure. You'll start to see your little pressure gauge over here pop up as it builds pressure, but it'll take a few minutes before your actual gauge starts to move. Okay, we've hit 11 pounds of pressure, so we're going to set our timer for 65 minutes now. So we processed our sweet potatoes for 65 minutes at 11 pounds of pressure. We've since turned the canner off and we're just letting it naturally come down to a 0 pressure. Once it comes down where there's no pressure left on the pressure canner, then we can remove our pressure stabilizer and take the lid off. But right now it just needs to naturally come down to 0 pressure. You don't want to take your stabilizer off. You don't want to open the lid or anything when it's done. Just because the processing time is over doesn't mean that you'll take the lid off or anything like that immediately. Just let it naturally come down to a 0 pressure. All right, so our pressure canner has come down from its high pressure. It's not showing any pressure on the gauge. Our little pressure valve there has settled back down, so we're ready to go ahead and remove our pressure regulator. We can go ahead and take the lid off. There's no pressure left on this pressure canner. You definitely do not want to do this if there is still pressure on this pressure canner. Tilt the lid away from you because that steam will burn you. You need to invest in one of these. If you're going to be canning, you've got to have a jar remover. This grips onto the lids of the jars so you can take them out. As you can see, they're still boiling. Make sure that you put your jars down onto a towel so they don't crack when they hit this cold granite or any kind of cold countertop, honestly. Start hearing them pop as the lids seal. These jars will need to sit undisturbed for about 24 hours once we take them out of the canner. You'll hear most of them sealing within the first few minutes, but at least 24 hours undisturbed to make sure that they fully seal.